What if the greatest threat to America's future isn't a recession, a stock market crash, or even inflation? What if the real danger has been quietly building for years, hidden behind rising stock prices, government spending programs, and headlines focused on everything except the one issue that could eventually affect every American family? According to legendary investor and macroeconomic thinker Ray Dalio, the United States may be approaching one of the most important financial turning points in modern history. The warning signs are becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. America's debt burden has grown to levels that would have seemed unimaginable only a generation ago, and the cost of carrying that debt is rising faster than many experts expected. While politicians continue debating short-term issues, Dalio believes a much bigger problem is developing beneath the surface. The debt bomb is no longer something that may explode years from now. In his view, the process may have already begun, and the consequences could reshape the economic future of millions of Americans. For decades, America enjoyed a unique advantage that few nations in history have possessed. The U.S. dollar became the world's dominant reserve currency, and investors across the globe viewed American government debt as one of the safest investments available. This allowed the United States to borrow enormous amounts of money at relatively low costs. As long as confidence remained strong, the system appeared almost limitless. Governments could spend more than they collected in taxes, run deficits year after year, and continue borrowing without facing immediate consequences. Economic growth, innovation, and global demand for dollars helped support the system. Because everything seemed to work, very few people questioned whether the model could continue indefinitely. But according to Ray Dalio, history shows that every debt cycle eventually reaches a stage where borrowing creates more problems than benefits. The challenge is that most people fail to recognize that turning point until it has already arrived. To understand why Dalio is concerned, it's important to understand how debt actually works. Debt itself is not inherently bad. Families borrow money to buy homes. Businesses borrow money to expand operations. Governments borrow money to fund projects, respond to emergencies, and invest in future growth. The problem begins when debt grows faster than income. Imagine a family that earns $100,000 a year, but spends $120,000. At first, the difference may seem manageable. They borrow little money and continue living comfortably. The following year they do the same thing. Then again and again. Over time, the debt grows larger while interest payments increase. Eventually, a significant portion of their income goes toward servicing old debt rather than improving their financial situation. The family may look successful from the outside, but underneath the surface, financial pressure continues building. Ray Dalio argues that the United States faces a similar challenge on a much larger scale. The issue isn't simply that America has debt. The issue is the speed at which debt continues growing. Every year, the federal government spends more money than it collects through taxes and other revenues. The difference is covered by borrowing. When borrowing becomes a permanent solution instead of a temporary tool, debt accumulates rapidly. Over time, interest costs begin consuming larger portions of the national budget. This creates a dangerous cycle. The government borrows money, pays interest on that debt, then borrows even more money in the future. At some point, interest expenses themselves become one of the largest spending categories. According to Dalio, this is where warning lights begin flashing. Once a nation reaches a stage where debt servicing consumes massive resources, its flexibility begins to disappear. Most Americans don't pay attention to government debt because they don't see its effects immediately. People notice rising grocery prices. They notice expensive housing. They notice high interest rates on credit cards and car loans. They notice when finding a good job becomes more difficult. What many people fail to realize is that all of these issues can be connected to broader fiscal and monetary conditions. Debt problems rarely arrive like a sudden earthquake. Instead, they often emerge slowly, affecting different parts of the economy one piece at a time. This gradual nature makes them especially dangerous because people adapt to worsening conditions without recognizing the larger trend. One of Dalio's biggest concerns is the explosion in interest payments. As debt grows larger and interest rates remain elevated, the government's borrowing costs increase dramatically. Think about what happens when someone has a massive credit card balance and interest rates rise. Monthly payments become more expensive even if known purchases are made. Now imagine that scenario applied to trillions of dollars of debt. Every increase in borrowing costs creates additional pressure on federal finances. Money that could have been spent on infrastructure, education, healthcare, or scientific innovation must instead be directed toward paying interest. This creates a situation where future growth opportunities become increasingly limited by past borrowing decisions. Another reason Dalio believes the debt situation is becoming dangerous is because economic growth alone may no longer be enough to solve the problem. For many years, policymakers could argue that debt wasn't a major concern because the economy continued expanding. Growth made the debt burden appear manageable. However, when debt grows faster than the economy itself, the relationship begins moving in the wrong direction. Eventually, the nation owes more relative to its productive capacity. That's when investors start asking difficult questions. Can future tax revenues support current obligations? Will economic growth remain strong enough to offset rising debt costs? These questions become increasingly important as debt levels climb higher. Housing provides a powerful example of how millions of Americans dream of owning a home. Yet affordability has become one of the country's biggest economic challenges. Mortgage rates remain significantly higher than they were only a few years ago. Broader debt and interest rate dynamics play an important role. When governments borrow heavily and financial conditions tighten, borrowing costs often rise across the economy. That affects everyone from first-time homebuyers to large corporations. Inflation represents another critical piece of the puzzle. Many Americans still feel frustrated by the sharp increase, and utility bills have all become more expensive. Debt-related policies can contribute to inflationary pressures over time. Governments facing large policies that financial system, they can also reduce purchasing power. People may earn more money but still feel poorer because prices rise faster than incomes. Dalio frequently emphasizes that maintaining purchasing power is one of the most important financial challenges individuals face during major debt cycles. Perhaps the most overlooked aspect of the debt issue is its impact on confidence. Financial systems are built on trust. Investors buy government bonds because they believe obligations will be honored. Businesses invest because they believe economic conditions will remain stable. Consumers spend because they believe their future income is secure. When confidence is strong, economies function efficiently. When confidence weakens, problems can spread rapidly. Dalio often points out that confidence can take decades to build and only a short period to deteriorate. This is one reason why fiscal discipline matters. The perception that a nation can responsibly manage its finances influences everything from borrowing costs to currency strength. America's position as the issuer of the world's reserve currency has provided extraordinary benefits, but Dalio argues that many people mistakenly assume those benefits are permanent. History tells a different story. Throughout history, dominant economic powers have eventually faced challenges to their financial leadership. The Dutch guilder once played a central role in global trade. The British pound dominated international finance for generations. Eventually, both lost their position. This doesn't mean the dollar is about to disappear. Rather, Dalio uses history to remind people that no financial advantage lasts forever. Maintaining leadership requires responsible management. strong institutions, and sustained confidence. The political implications of rising debt are equally significant. As financial pressures increase, political divisions often become more intense. Different groups demand different solutions. Some advocate higher taxes. Others demand spending cuts. Some support monetary intervention, while others oppose it. These disagreements become more difficult to resolve as debt burdens increase. History shows that periods of economic stress frequently coincide with social and political tension. When living standards stagnate and financial uncertainty grows, public frustration tends to rise. Dalio frequently highlights this relationship because economic challenges rarely remain purely economic. Investors face unique challenges during these periods. Many people assume that stock markets will continue rising because they have performed well over the long term. While long-term optimism may be justified, debt cycles can create periods of significant volatility. Corporate profits depend on economic growth. Consumer spending depends on financial confidence. Business investment depends on access to affordable capital. When debt pressures influence these factors, market conditions can become more unpredictable. This doesn't necessarily mean investors should panic. Instead, Dalio encourages preparation rather than prediction. Understanding risk allows individuals to make more informed decisions. One lesson that appears repeatedly throughout history is that debt crises rarely emerge from a single event. Instead, they develop gradually through years of small decisions. Governments run deficits because immediate spending appears beneficial. Voters support programs that provide short-term advantages. Investors continue lending because confidence remains high. Each individual decision appears reasonable. However, when combined over decades, these decisions can produce imbalances that eventually require correction. By the time the problem becomes obvious, available solutions are often more painful than they would have been years earlier. Despite his warnings, Ray Dalio does not argue that America's future is hopeless. In fact, he consistently acknowledges the nation's tremendous strength. The United States remains home to many of the world's most innovative companies, leading universities, entrepreneurial talent, and deep financial markets. These advantages are real and significant. However, strengths alone do not eliminate risks. Great nations can make poor financial decisions. Powerful economies can experience debt problems. Success today does not guarantee success tomorrow. Dalio's message is ultimately about recognizing reality rather than ignoring it. Young Americans may be particularly affected by the choices being made today. The debt accumulated now will influence economic conditions for decades. Future taxpayers will help finance obligations created by previous generations. This reality makes financial literacy increasingly important. Understanding debt, inflation, interest rates, and economic cycles may become one of the most valuable skills people can develop. Those who understand how these forces interact will be better positioned to adapt to changing conditions. Business owners must also prepare for a world where borrowing may remain expensive and economic growth may become less predictable. Companies that manage debt carefully, maintain strong balance sheets, and focus on efficiency often perform better during periods of uncertainty. Economic transitions create risks, but they also create opportunities. Businesses capable of adapting quickly can emerge stronger than competitors who assume conditions will always remain favorable. At its core, Dalio's warning revolves around one simple principle: numbers eventually matter. Political narratives change. Market trends come and go. Public attention shifts from one issue to another. But mathematics does not change. Debt either becomes more manageable or less manageable. Interest expenses either rise or fall. Fiscal conditions either improve or deteriorate. Reality eventually forces difficult questions to be answered. According to Dalio, America may be approaching one of those moments. The biggest mistake people can make is assuming that, because a crisis hasn't happened yet, it never will. History is filled with examples of risks that were ignored until they became impossible to avoid. Financial systems often appear stable right up until the point when confidence begins shifting. That's why Dalio believes preparation is essential. The goal isn't fear. The goal is awareness. Understanding risks allows individuals, businesses, and governments to respond intelligently rather than emotionally. As America moves deeper into this new economic era, the debate will continue. Some will argue that the debt problem is manageable. Others will insist that major reforms are necessary. But regardless of political opinions, one fact remains undeniable. The debt continues growing, interest costs continue rising, and the long-term consequences continue becoming more important. Whether the situation is resolved through growth, reform, inflation, or some combination of factors remains uncertain. What is certain is that Ray Dalio believes the warning signs are no longer hidden. They are visible in rising borrowing costs, affordability challenges, inflation concerns, and increasing fiscal pressure. The debt bomb may not explode in a single dramatic moment. It may unfold gradually through economic adjustments that reshape the lives of ordinary Americans. And if Dalio's analysis is correct, the question is no longer whether America has a debt problem. The question is whether the country will address it before the consequences become far more difficult to manage.